welcome. I think today there's a fair chance that I might look a bit stupid. Whatever, but whatever. At least we're gonna have a proper camera angle. So what I'm trying to do here is talk a bit about something that could be really great in sim racing, but I guess it's not acknowledged as much. And I'm talking about classic cars a bit in general. And for today, I'm just choosing the 1989 Audi IMSA 90 GTO, which is a 720 horsepower machine. But before we actually get to drive this, I researched a bit, and there's a bit of interesting stuff to talk about this, because in 1988, Audi did win the Trans Am Championship in the US with an all-wheel drive system, but this was based on Audi 200, so pretty much stock car with a bit of changes. But yeah, they were looking for new challenges also because in 1998, staying in Trans Am, they would have gotten a huge amount of bob, whatever they did back then, probably restrictors, weight, whatever. And yeah, they didn't want to be at the back of the field, so they decided to go for something else. They were looking for a series, and they decided, together with IMSA back then, to, well, have a go. And this was really interesting because the car they had, they just couldn't use that at all. They had to build their first real prototype, and they were sticking to the 5-cylinder engine that is now really famous that they already had from the rally car. They were sticking to the all-wheel drive system they, well, knew from the rally car. But everything else on the car was really different. There's a bit of, hey, they took the same engine, blah, 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 but not actually the case. Everything was purpose-built, custom-built for that series, basically everything from the engine. So what those cars then featured is the Audi 90 GTO is much lower center of gravity. They had much wider tires, bigger wings, more downforce in general. The car was insanely wide. Of course, they were driving on different tracks. And they were able to reduce the weight to 900 kilos in the car. So all they had was the wire frame, and everything else was prototype material, carbon, fiber, whatever. And the rule said 1,200 kilos is the minimum. So what they had to do is add 300 kilos somewhere in the car where they wanted to have it, which gave them huge amount of options for distributing the weight on the car. So they had loads of room there. The only thing that remained stock on the car was the roof, which had to remain steel from the rulebook. Though they are kind of perfectionists, I don't know if it's being German or they were just more aware of any PR issues if they actually fail in the first races. So they skipped the first two races, which was Daytona and the Sebring race, which was 24 and 12 hours respectively. They skipped those and they joined the series from race 3 because only then they were sure the car would actually make it. And during development, they were aiming to have the car run 3 times the race distances they actually had to do without failure. Which just extended the development time, and they rather skipped a few races, lost a few points, rather than having a smoking engine middle of the track. First race went horrible, nonetheless, but they kept improving, and sooner or later they kept winning races, a lot of them one after another. Some stats about the car: they were running up to 3 bars of pressure from a 2.2 liter 5-cylinder engine, in the end producing something around 720 brake horsepowers. One very interesting thing was that they had to use, in the US, they were using not jet fuel, well, it was jet fuel, in fact. And this burns a little warmer than what the engines normally burned when they were racing. And this led to the issue that the pistons were often melting, so they had to change the material until they could use or work with the heat that was developing in the engine. Another thing was, to get the power from the car, they had to put so much fuel in the cylinder that they actually went to Bosch, third-party company in Germany, like an automotive supplier, and had purpose-built injection built. And they were using 2, in fact, to work with insane fuel amounts they had to put in the engine. I was driving a Sebring, and we will do in a second, and the car was actually using something like 8 to 8.5 liters per lap. On roughly a 2-minute lap, they were using 8 liters to produce that power. So what I'm gonna do is I want to take that car, Assetto Corsa mod, obviously, to the track where it hasn't actually been driving, because they only really drove it for the 89 season, then they were done with it. They were just shy of the title by a couple points, because for the last race, suddenly someone decided we should change the material of the pistons in the cylinder, and both cars failed. So they could have certainly won the title, but yeah, someone got a bit too eager there, and they ended the championship second. But still, they made a huge impression with an insane car, and Simracing gives us the huge opportunity to kind of go back to those times, get a feeling for those cars. And I spent a bit of time with the car, like an hour and a bit more, and I did a couple takes with the camera already and failed massively. So yeah, I had a couple laps already and didn't even think to mention that, but when I drove the car, I really got the impression that there's much more depth in those mods if you spend more time with them rather than just driving 5-6 laps or whatever. So I actually fiddled around with the setup a bit, and I got the car to drive pretty amazing. So this is what I want to show you. I'm going to take a few AIs with me on track. They aren't necessarily super fast, so let's take 25, start at the very back of the grid, start AC, and then I'm gonna start this little fella here as well after I've loaded up the setup. So let me bring up the game screen actually until all the cars are loaded. So there you see the beast. You probably can't see the setup that I'm loading because of, well, just cropping the image here a bit. But let me tell you, there's a lot to play around with, and I already noticed what's a bit of an issue for me was not being able to shift the weight around in the car, those 300 kilos that they could place wherever they want. So the mod kind of doesn't feature placing the weight around the corners of the car, which would be great, but I couldn't really find it. However, you have control about the turbocharger, the ref line, so you can even get a bit more power from the car. I turned off the damage because if you run the engine at the very top, it's very easy to actually destroy it. And with the all-wheel drive, the car was very understeery most of the time. So what I did eventually then was to change the setup, made the rear springs harder, changed the aero balance a bit more on the nose, dialed the brake bias backwards, like all the things that you know. And sooner or later, the car really started working. And I was able to become a real driver of this car and demand things from the car that I think I wasn't able with the stock setup. And you really only get that when you spend time with the car. But enough of the talking, let's really get driving. So let me get this running here real quick. There you go. And hopefully I'll keep my head down so we can actually enjoy this a bit. So I put 8, oh, that's 2 little liters actually. So back to the pits real quick. That's not gonna take me too far in the race. Fuel, I probably, so as I said, for 10 laps I need 80 liters. I don't think we're gonna finish the race because it takes a bit too long. So let's take 85 and then enjoy this a bit. Way too long for the start actually. Box down. Even though I chose already somewhat of a shorter gearing, the AI, as I said, they aren't particularly good. There's some weird effect on the windscreen there when the sun comes in from the side. Ooh, it didn't actually meant to do this. Didn't expect me to back up this aggressively. Okay, come on guys, move. Move. I want to get to the front here. Somewhat managed to start. let's talk about how it drives a bit. So as I already said, initially, with the default setup, the car definitely was on the understeering side of things, and it took me some time to dial this out of the car. So one thing I did then is stiffen the rear springs, give the car a bit of brake, change the aero balance a bit. I mean, there is not an actual value, but increase the front wing a bit, decrease the rear wing, and most importantly, I changed that now the power the car is producing is going 90% to the rear wheels and only 10% to the front wheels. And this is already enough, or not enough, I mean it's almost all the way, to finally get the rear end of the car to work with me on throttle and not just pull me straight into the walls. Now you see the understeer is still somewhat there, and it was much worse at the beginning. That's another good thing with all-wheel drive. You can catch the car in this way when you're all the way sideways. I was just a bit confused because the game seems a tiny bit laggy, but let's stick to this for the time being. Maybe it's just a 25 cars to challenge the PC here a bit. And then the other thing which gave me a lot of control in the car is turning traction control off, turning the ABS off. And then when the ABS was off, I'm not sure I was full screen, so yeah, it should be fine now. When the ABS was off, then the car actually allowed me to lock the tires when I wanted to, and this gave me a huge amount of control how I get the car into the corners, and now I could slide the rear a bit on the brakes and build almost somewhat of a dancing car and work a bit with the tank snapper and the weight of the car and really start balancing it around. And then I got the feeling that I was actually driving this car and not be so much of a passenger of the understeer. I'm braking a lot here, but that's a great thing about the all-wheel drive. You just pin the power down and the car pulls itself straight to the exit of the corner. Okay, we're clear. Also, of course, when you're without the ABS, you have to be really gentle on the brakes, else you just lock up way too much. Cars back then generally rather soft, even of course as a prototype they made it rather stiff, but in comparison to what they achieved today, the car was still soft, so the bumps here on Sebring aren't actually that bad. I also tried Daytona, but because there's so much going straight, I chose to do Sebring instead, so we can actually see a bit of driving. Putting late apexes here to work around the understeer and exit. Swing it around, really work with a weight transfer. I mean, I'm overdoing it a bit to really show you, but this is such a nice way of driving the car when you have so much confidence in the rear end, because the all-wheel drive always saves you. And I get that today, of course, developing costs of an all-wheel drive system in a race car probably just very expensive, more parts that can fail. But it's such a good concept. Is he still there? Leave a bit of room. Oh, here we get the nicer exit here. Pin it tight to the left, bit of a lift. Wait for the chirping of the turbocharger to slam the next gear in. Over-under works incredibly nice here, at least with the AIs. I have to say, the more time I spend with this car, the nicer it becomes to drive, the better I understand it, the more consistently I nail my braking points, the better I can predict where the car actually ends up in the corner. When I trail the brake a little deeper, when I hit the throttle a little harder, hit a little earlier, how I angle the car into the corner. And I'd love to see us do this sort of stuff, reliving the past a bit, because of course it's not viable to do this anymore in real life. Just, I mean, how much fuel the car uses, how expensive it is to build spare parts for something that isn't in production anymore. But sim racing really offers that opportunity to do something that is completely idiotic and pointless, but is a lot of fun in return. Felt good through the right hand, and I messed up the left hand. That could have been a really nice corner. So chase the leader down here, and then go for a hot lap. Oh my god. Ooh, locked up way too much. They're much too eager. But will happen sooner or later. Or her. I don't know. AI. Can be anything. Always have to give the throttle blip here. Trail deep into the corner. Intentionally make the rear end lose grip on entry, so you can get it to rotate. Then you just slam the throttle. Yep, that happened earlier too, so we'll have to regroup a bit here. Michael Hamlin is gonna hate me for the rejoin, but here we are again. Dive bomb incoming. Oh, kind of worked. Oh, he saw it coming. Well, he could not defend that. I've made my life a little easier. You're just flat shifting. Arthur would probably want this to be 8 shifted manually with a clutch, but I'm not so nostalgic. That's one of the faster eyes, I have to say, up front there. We're gonna hunt him down now, really pushing, dancing the power on the brakes. Trailing the brake deep to a late apex, slamming the power, get the rear end a bit loose, out of shape, to really throw it into the corners here and get the rotation that we need. Both gear just about the right length there. With the turbo, with the all-wheel drive, obviously, you can just take a bit of grass, can take a bit of sand everywhere. There will be eventually some tire that still has the grip. Aggressive here. The car sorts me out. Imagine being back in the 80s and pushing this car to the very limit in real life. What a mad machine. Okay, now it's gonna be a bit easy because the AI always loses a bit of speed here on the exit. Corner really allows you to do a lot of over-under different lines, so you can probably pass back and forth every time. Okay, they are running out of fuel. That's how much the car is using. Let's try a hot lap. I'll shut up. 1.6, I take it. I think is one of the better laps. Was still a mistake, like shortly before going onto the back straight. But I hope this was showing you something. So let's get back and summarize this a bit. Oof. So yeah, back after this was hopefully a nice experience for you as well. I totally suggest you to download the car. I'll put the link in the description, of course. I'll save the setup. I'll actually put it on my Discord, so join this as well. And while I'm at it, many people don't seem to know this channel has a member section where I'm uploading a lot of the coaching sessions that I'm doing with those buying them. And I'm also loading a lot of very lengthy track guides lasting half an hour to 3/4 of an hour sometimes. So yeah, this is like the exclusive content you get with the second tier membership. Just wanted to mention that here. And now back to that car, and why I think sim racing and the companies coming to sim racing are really missing out on a great opportunity here. Nowadays, sim racing has become like the showcase for the automotive companies to show their most recent cars. But I think sim racing offers a huge opportunity to really celebrate the history that motorsports has without having all the negative things attached to what is now pretty much an environmental issue with running those cars, with like just using way too much fuel, oil, and whatever, and it's just unreasonable to run them. But it's such a great experience to go back in time a little and push those kind of cars to the max. We don't really know how accurate these things are in the mods, but what is there to lose for the big companies? Why don't they share actual data from the car back then? With the modding community, I think there are a couple super great teams building those cars, and what they could do with actual real life data and what they could replicate and give us in the sim to experience, I think this is unrivaled. Speaking of that, this was one of the first cars that was featuring, well, telemetry live to the pit wall, and what they were having were tire pressures, a bit of temperature, and I believe simply a speed or lap time or something, but very few data. And it's not like they were having this on a computer screen. They were having this printed with a needle printer in the, not actually the pit box, but like they brought a truck with all the antennas to actually receive the data. So yeah, I want to leave and close this video at that. We're looking 25 minutes, which is pretty much the exact thing that YouTube wants. So hopefully you enjoyed this. Click like, subscribe, join the Discord, and see you soon for, I guess, more of what we just did, and probably in a BMW. Bye.